The clock on Officer Daniel Hayes's dashboard read 11:47 p.m. when everything went wrong. The back roads of Millbrook County were eerily quiet that October night, with only the distant hum of his patrol car cutting through the darkness. Daniel had been a police officer for 12 years, and he knew these winding roads like the back of his hand. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the shadows seemed deeper and the silence more oppressive. He'd received the anonymous tip just an hour earlier. Suspicious activity near the old Miller farm drug deals, the caller had whispered before hanging up. Daniel had seen enough in his career to know that anonymous tips often led to dead ends, but something in the caller's voice had convinced him to investigate. As his headlights swept across the abandoned farmhouse, Daniel noticed tire tracks in the mud. Fresh ones. His pulse quickened. Maybe this wasn't a dead end after all. He radioed dispatch, his voice steady despite the unease creeping up his spine. Unit 47 to dispatch investigating possible drug activity at Miller Farm. Everything looks quiet, but I'm going to take a closer look. Copy that, Unit 47. Backup is 20 minutes out if you need it. 20 minutes. Daniel parked his cruiser and stepped into the night air, his hand instinctively resting on his service weapon. The autumn wind carried the scent of dying leaves and something else, cigarette smoke. He wasn't alone. The attack came from behind, swift and brutal. A pipe wrench caught him across the skull, sending him crashing to the gravel. Stars exploded behind his eyes as he hit the ground hard, his radio skittering away into the darkness. Should have minded your own business, Hayes. A gravelly voice snarled above him. Daniel tried to focus, tried to reach for his weapon, but his vision was swimming. Through the haze he could make out two figures standing over him, one tall and lanky, the other built like a linebacker. The smell of whiskey and sweat filled his nostrils. He's seen too much, Tony, the larger man said, his voice thick with a southern drawl. We can't let him walk away from this. I know, Russ, I know. The pipe wrench gleamed in Tony's hand as he raised it again. Nothing personal, Officer Hayes, just business. The second blow sent Daniel into darkness. When he came to, the men were gone, and he was alone on the desolate road. Pain radiated through his skull like white-hot lightning, and he could taste blood in his mouth. His left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. No, probably broken. His radio lay smashed 20 feet away, its plastic casing scattered across the asphalt. Daniel tried to sit up, but agony shot through his ribs. At least 3 were broken, maybe more. Each breath was a struggle, and he could feel warmth spreading across his shirt, blood from internal injuries. His patrol car was gone. They'd taken it along with any hope of calling for help. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, swallowed by darkness. No streetlights, no houses, no traffic, just Daniel Hayes dying slowly on cold asphalt, with nothing but stars as witnesses to his final moments. That's when he heard the voices. Sophie, wait up. Mom said, not to go too far. I'm not going far. Max just wants to explore a little. More. Children. Daniel's heart leapt despite the pain. He tried to call out, but only a weak whisper escaped his lips. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by the sound of paws on gravel. 2 identical figures emerged from the tree line there, flashlight beams dancing across the road. Twin girls, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with matching pigtails and concerned expressions. Between them bounded a magnificent German shepherd, his coat a rich brown and black in the moonlight. Emily and Sophie. Patterson had been camping with their parents at Millbrook State Park when their dog Max had suddenly bolted into the woods. The twins had followed, worried he might get lost or hurt. Their parents were back at the campsite, probably wondering where. And they'd gone. Oh my gosh! Emily gasped, her flashlight beam finding Daniel's crumpled form. Sophie, there's a man on the road. Sophie rushed forward, Max close behind. The dog immediately sensed something was wrong. His ears perked forward, and a low, Whine escaped his throat. Mister, are you okay? Sophie knelt beside Daniel, her small hands shaking as she reached toward him. Daniel forced his eyes open, focusing on the two young faces staring down at him with concern. Angels, he thought. I'm seeing angels, girls. His voice was barely audible. Call for help. Emily fumbled for her phone, but the screen showed no signal bars. They were too far from civilization, too deep in the woods. There's no service, she whispered to her sister, panic creeping into her voice. Max seemed to understand the gravity of the situation better than anyone. The intelligent German shepherd moved closer to Daniel, sniffing gently at his injuries, before looking back at the twins with an expression that seemed almost human in its urgency. "We have to do something," Sophie said, tears forming in her eyes. "He's really hurt, Em. Really, really hurt." Daniel could feel consciousness slipping away again. The pain was becoming distant, replaced by a cold numbness that he recognized. As shock, his breathing was growing shallower, and he knew he didn't have long, girls. He managed to whisper, "My name is Daniel Hayes, Officer Daniel Hayes. Tell my wife, tell Sarah." But the twins weren't listening to last words. They were listening to Max. The dog had positioned himself next to Daniel's head, his warm body providing what little comfort he could, but his eyes were fixed on something in the distance, Daniel's broken radio glinting in the moonlight. Max barked once, sharp and commanding, then looked back at the girls. "What is it, boy?" Emily asked, following his gaze. Sophie understood first. "The radio. Emily, that's a police radio." The twins rushed to the scattered pieces of plastic and circuitry. The device was damaged, but the main unit seemed intact. Sophie picked it up with trembling hands and pressed what looked like a talk button. Static crackled through the night air. "Hello?" Sophie's voice was high and scared. "Hello? Is anyone there? We found a police officer on the road, and he's really, really hurt." For a moment there was only static, then a voice cut through the darkness, like a lifeline. "This is dispatch. Who am I speaking with? My name is Sophie Patterson, and I'm with my sister Emily. We're on." She looked around desperately. "At the dark road, Miller Road," Daniel whispered, using what might have been his last breath. "Near the old farm, Miller Road, near the old farm," Sophie repeated into the radio. "Please hurry. He's bleeding and he can't move, and we don't know what to do." "Stay calm, sweetheart. Help is on the way. Are you girls safe? Are the people who hurt the officer still there?" Emily and Sophie exchanged frightened glances. They hadn't thought about that. What if the bad men came back? Max seemed to read their thoughts. The German shepherd rose to his feet, positioning himself between the twins and the dark road beyond. His ears were alert, scanning for any sign of danger, ready to protect his young companions and the wounded officer with his life as sirens began to wail in the distance, still too far away to offer comfort. Daniel Hayes closed his eyes and felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood. The absolute trust that comes from knowing someone is watching over you. Two little girls, and their dog had found him in his darkest moment. But this was just the beginning of their story. The real test was yet to come. The static from the broken radio crackled intermittently as Sophie clutched it with white knuckles, waiting for another response. From dispatch beside her, Emily knelt next to Officer Hayes, her small hands hovering uncertainly over his injuries, afraid to touch him, but desperate to help. "Mr. Hayes," she whispered, "the ambulance is coming. You just have to hold on a little bit. Longer, okay?" Daniel's eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus on the young face above him. The pain in his skull was like a bass drum, each heartbeat sending fresh waves of agony through his broken body. But somehow, looking at these two brave little girls, he found the strength to speak. How old are you girls?" "We're 9, Sophie answered, still gripping the radio. "We'll be 10 next month. Emily's older by 4 minutes, though, despite everything." Daniel managed a weak smile. 9 years old, and you're the bravest people I've ever met." Max whined softly and moved closer to Daniel's side. his warm fur pressing against the officer's arm. The dog seemed to understand that body heat was important, that keeping the wounded man warm might mean the difference between life and death. Max likes you, Emily said, gently stroking her dog's head. He doesn't usually warm up to strangers so fast. Smart dog, Daniel whispered. Very smart dog. The radio crackled again and dispatcher's voice cut through the night. Girls, this is Sergeant Martinez. The paramedics are about 15 minutes out. Can you tell me more about Officer Hayes's condition? Sophie pressed the talk button. He's bleeding from his head, and his leg looks really twisted. He's awake, but he talks really quiet, like it's hard for him. That's very helpful, Sophie. You're doing great. Now I need you to listen carefully. Don't try to move him, and don't give him any water, even if he asks. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. Good girl. Are your parents nearby? Emily and Sophie looked at each other with sudden realization. In their focus on helping the injured officer, they'd completely forgotten that their mum and dad would be worried sick. They're back at our campsite, Emily said, when Sophie held the radio toward her. We followed Max into the woods when he ran off, and we found Officer Hayes okay, honey. We'll make sure your parents know you're safe. Just keep doing what you're doing. The minutes stretched like hours. Daniel drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes muttering incoherently about corruption and cover-ups. During his lucid moments, he tried to warn the girls about the men who had attacked him. Girls, he said during one clear moment, grabbing Sophie's wrist with surprising strength. The men who did this, they might come back. If you see headlights, if you see any cars, you hide. You take Max and you hide in the woods until the police arrive. Promise me, we promise, Emily said solemnly. Though her voice trembled, Max's head suddenly snapped up, his ears rotating like radar dishes. A low growl rumbled in his chest and his hackles began to rise. What is it, boy? Sophie whispered. The dog was staring down the dark road, his body tense with alertness, his nose twitched, sampling scents carried on the night wind. Emily strained to listen, but heard nothing except the distant sound of sirens, still too far away to provide immediate help. Maybe he smells a raccoon or something. But Max's behavior suggested otherwise. The German Shepherd moved away from Daniel's side and positioned himself at the edge of the road, his stance protective and alert. His growl became more pronounced, and his lips pulled back to reveal sharp white teeth. Girls, Daniel's voice was urgent, despite his weakness. Listen to me. Max knows. Something dogs, they can hear and smell things we can't. If he's warning you about something, you need to take it seriously. Sophie looked between the dog and the officer, fear growing in her chest. But we can't leave you here alone. You have to. If those men come back, Daniel tried to sit up but gasped in pain. They killed once tonight. They won't hesitate to hurt children. We're not leaving you, Emily declared with the fierce determination that only a 9-year-old can muster. Max, come here. But the German Shepherd refused to budge. He remained at his post, scanning the darkness with the intensity of a sentry. His growling had stopped, but his body language spoke of coiled tension, ready to spring into action at the first sign of threat. The radio crackled. Girls, how are you holding up? The ambulance is about 10 minutes away now. We're okay, Sophie replied, though her voice betrayed her growing anxiety. But Max is acting weird. He keeps staring down the road like something's coming. There was a pause before Sergeant Martinez responded. Sophie, I want you and Emily to trust your dog's instincts. If Max seems concerned about something, you girls need to be extra careful. Stay low, and if you see any vehicles that aren't clearly marked as emergency services, you get into the woods immediately. Daniel felt a surge of gratitude toward the unseen sergeant. At least someone else understood the gravity of the situation. Officer Hayes, Emily said quietly. What happened to you? Who did this? Daniel closed his eyes, trying to organize his thoughts, despite the pain clouding his mind. I was investigating drug dealers, but they knew I was coming. Someone tipped them off. Bad guys? Sophie asked. Very bad guys. They're involved in something big, something. That goes deeper than just selling drugs, I think. I think there might be police officers helping them. The twins exchanged worried glances. If there were bad police officers, how could they know who to trust? Max suddenly went rigid. His ears perked. Forward. This time even the girls could hear it, the low rumble of an engine in the distance. Someone's coming, Emily whispered. The sound grew louder, and they could see headlights cutting through the darkness, still far off, but approaching steadily. Is it the ambulance? Sophie asked, hopefully. Daniel strained to listen. No wrong sound. Ambulance sirens would be much louder by now. The headlights were getting closer, and Max's growling resumed deeper and more menacing than before. Girls, Daniel's voice was weak but urgent. Go now. Take Max and hide in the trees. But now! The command in his voice, even weakened by injury, was unmistakable. The twins grabbed their flashlight and scrambled toward the tree line. Max reluctantly following, but constantly, looking back toward Daniel and the approaching vehicle. From their hiding spot behind a large oak tree, Emily and Sophie watched as the headlights grew brighter. The vehicle was moving slowly, as if the driver was searching for something or someone. What if it's the bad men? Sophie whispered, clutching her sister's hand. Then Max will protect us, Emily replied with more confidence than she felt. The German shepherd seemed to understand the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, despite every instinct, telling him to stay with the injured officer. He had followed the children into the woods. Now he stood between them and whatever was coming down that dark road, ready to fight with everything he had. The vehicle drew closer, its headlights sweeping. Across Daniel's motionless form on the asphalt, the engine slowed, then stopped. Car doors slammed, footsteps approached the wounded officer. And in the darkness of the forest, two little girls and their loyal dog prepared to witness something that would test their courage beyond anything they could have imagined. The radio in Sophie's hand crackled with static, and Sergeant Martinez's voice seemed impossibly far away. Girls? Girls, are you there? The paramedics are 5 minutes out. Can you hear me? Sophie wanted to answer, wanted to tell the sergeant that the bad men had returned, but she didn't dare make a sound, because Max was growling again. And this time there was something different in that growl. This time it sounded like war. The two men who emerged from the beat-up pickup truck moved with the casual confidence of predators returning to finish their kill. Tony Messina, the shorter of the two, still carried the pipe wrench that had nearly ended Daniel Hayes' life an hour earlier. His partner, Russ Hawkins, was built like a linebacker and moved with surprising quiet for such a large man. Well, Tony's voice carried clearly through the night air to where the twins crouched behind the oak tree. Look who's still breathing from. Their hiding spot, Emily and Sophie could see Officer Hayes lying motionless on the asphalt, illuminated by the truck's headlights. Like an actor on a stage, Max pressed himself lower to the ground between them, every muscle coiled with tension thought. You said you finished him, Russ muttered, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. I thought I did. Tony knelt beside Daniel, checking for a pulse. Tough son of a bitch, I'll give him that. Daniel's eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty on the man crouched over him. You're making a mistake, he whispered. People know where I am. Tony laughed, but there was no humor in it. No, Hayes. You're the one who made the mistake, should have taken. The money like Johnson did, should have looked the other way. Sophie's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Officer Johnson. She knew that name. He was the police officer who sometimes came to their school to talk about safety. Was he one of the bad ones? The whole thing's falling apart because of you, Russ said, taking a long drag from his cigarette. 20 years we've been running product through this county. 20 years of everybody minding their own business. Then you have to go and Be a Boy Scout. Daniel tried to focus through the pain and blood loss. The drugs, that's not all of it, is it? You're moving more than just drugs. Tony's expression darkened. Smart cop. Too smart for your own good, people. Daniel said the word, escaping as barely more than a breath. You're trafficking people, among other things, Tony admitted. Turns out, there's good money in lots of different kinds of cargo, drugs, guns, people who don't want to be found, people who don't want to stay lost. We're what you might call full-service logistics. The twins exchanged horrified glances. Even at 9 years old, they understood enough to know they were witnessing something terrible, something that went far beyond anything they'd seen in movies or read. In books, Russ flicked his cigarette into the darkness, the ember tracing a brief arc before hitting the ground. We need to finish this and get out of here. Too many people are going to start looking for him soon. Already are, Tony said, pulling out a police scanner that crackled with radio chatter. Dispatch has been trying to raise him for the last hour, and get this, couple of kids found him somehow. Been talking to dispatch on his broken radio. Emily felt Sophie's hand tighten around hers. The baddie. Men knew about them kids. Russ looked around nervously. Where are they now? Gone, probably. Ran when they saw headlights coming. Tony stood up, the pipe wrench gleaming in his hand, but just in case they're still around, he cupped his hands around his mouth and called out in a sickly sweet voice, "Hey kids, we're police officers. It's okay to come out now." Max's growl became audible, and Emily quickly wrapped her arms around his muzzle to quiet him. The dog's whole body was trembling with the effort of restraint. "We know you're out there," Russ called. "Officer Hayes is going to be fine. We just need to ask you some questions." The twins pressed themselves closer to the oak tree, praying the darkness would hide them. Sophie still clutched the broken radio, afraid to use it, but unable to let it go. "Forget the kids," Tony said after a moment of listening to the silent forest. "They're long gone, and even if they're not, what are they gonna say?" 2 men came and talked to the police officer. Big deal, but Russ looked unconvinced. "Kids see everything, Tony. They notice stuff adults miss. Then we'll deal with that if it becomes a problem." Tony raised the pipe wrench above Daniel's head. "Right now we've got bigger concerns." Daniel tried to speak, but only blood emerged from his lips. The internal injuries were getting worse, and consciousness was slipping away again. "Wait," Russ said suddenly, grabbing Tony's wrist. "You hear that? Sirens. Still distant but getting closer." "Shit," Tony cursed. "How much?" "In time we got. 5 minutes, maybe less." Tony looked down at Daniel, then at his weapon. "Not enough time to make this look accidental. So what do? We disappear. Let someone else find him, but make sure he doesn't survive long enough to point fingers." Tony knelt beside Daniel again, his voice dropping to a whisper that barely carried to the twins' hiding spot. "Listen carefully, Hayes. You're gonna die tonight. Maybe in the ambulance, maybe at the hospital, but you're not gonna live to testify. We've got people everywhere, paramedics, doctors, nurses. Even if by some miracle you make it to trial, we've got people in the courthouse too." Daniel's eyes widened with the terrible realization of how deep the corruption ran. "And those kids who found you. If they saw our faces, if they heard our names, well, kids have accidents all the time. They wander off on camping trips and never come back." Sophie bit her lip so hard she tasted blood. Beside her, Emily was shaking with fear and fury. "See, the thing is," Tony continued, his voice as casual as if he were discussing the weather, "this whole operation is worth about $10 million a year. That's a lot of motivation to tie up loose ends." The sirens were getting louder now, and Russ was getting nervous. "We need to go, Tony, now." Yeah. Tony stood up, but he wasn't finished with his psychological torture. "Hey, Hayes, you got a family? Wife? Kids?" Daniel tried to speak, but couldn't manage more than a weak groan. "I'll take that as a yes." "Well, don't worry. If you somehow survive this, we'll make sure they don't. Can't have loose ends walking around, you understand?" From the forest, Emily watched Tony climb back into the passenger seat of the pickup truck. She'd never felt hatred before. not real. Hatred, but now it burned in her chest like a physical thing. Remember, Tony called out as Russ started the engine. You didn't see us here. In fact, you never saw us at all. The truck pulled away its taillights, disappearing into the darkness just as the first ambulance rounded the curve in the distance. As soon as the vehicle was gone, Max bolted from the tree line toward Daniel. The twins followed, their legs shaking, but their resolve firm. Officer Hayes. Sophie knelt beside him, the radio crackling. Back to life in her hands. The ambulance is here. You're going to be okay. But Daniel wasn't responding. His breathing was so shallow it was almost imperceptible, and his skin was pale and cold to the touch. Is he? Emily couldn't finish the question. Max whined and nuzzled Daniel's face gently, as if trying to coax him back to consciousness. The ambulance pulled up with a screech of brakes, followed immediately by 2 police cars. Paramedics rushed toward them, carrying medical equipment, while officers secured the scene. Are you the girls who called for help? One of the paramedics asked as she knelt beside Daniel and began checking his vitals. Yes, ma'am. Sophie said, is he going to be okay? The paramedic worked quickly, starting an IV and calling out medical terminology to her partner. He's lost a lot of blood and his pulse is weak. We need to get him to the hospital immediately. As they loaded Daniel onto a stretcher, one of the police officers approached the twins. I'm Sergeant Martinez. We talked on the radio. You girls did an amazing job tonight. Sergeant Martinez, Emily said urgently. There were 2 men here. Bad men. They said they were going to hurt Officer Hayes, and they said they had people everywhere, in the hospital and the police and everywhere. The sergeant's expression grew serious. 2 men. Can you describe them? One was short and mean-looking, and he had a pipe wrench. Sophie said the other one was really big and smoked cigarettes. They knew Officer Hayes' name, and they knew about us finding him. They said their names too. Emily added Tony and Russ. Sergeant Martinez was already reaching for her radio when the paramedic called out, "We're losing him! We need to move now." As the ambulance raced away into the night, its sirens wailing, the twins watched the red and blue lights disappear around the curve. Officer Hayes was alive, but barely. And somewhere in the darkness, Tony and Russ were planning their next move. Max sat beside the girls, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand that their ordeal was far from over. He'd protected them once tonight, but something told Emily that they would need his courage again soon, because men who trafficked in human lives wouldn't give up easily. And 9-year-old witnesses were exactly the kind of loose ends that needed to be eliminated. The red taillights of the ambulance had barely disappeared when Sergeant Martinez received the call that made her blood run cold. "Martinez," she answered, her radio keeping one eye on the Patterson twins as they comforted their agitated German Shepherd sergeant. "This is dispatch. We've got a problem." The ambulance carrying Officer Hayes never made it to County General. Emily saw the color drain from the sergeant's face. "What do you mean, didn't make it? They're 20 minutes overdue. No radio contact. We've got units searching the route now." Sophie grabbed her sister's hand. Even at 9 years old, they understood what this meant. The bad men had kept their promise. They had people everywhere. Sergeant Martinez, Emily said quietly. Tony said they had people who were paramedics. The sergeant knelt down to the twins' level, her voice gentle but urgent. "Girls, I need you to tell me everything you remember about those 2 men. Every word they said, every detail you can think of." For the next 10 minutes, Emily and Sophie recounted the terrifying conversation they'd overheard. They told her about the drug trafficking, the human trafficking, the corruption that reached into every level of law enforcement and emergency services. They mentioned Officer Johnson. Sophie said, "They said Officer Hayes should have taken money." Like Johnson did, Sergeant Martinez's jaw tightened. Johnson had been her partner 3 years ago if he was dirty. Her radio crackled again. All units. We've found the ambulance on Highway 9, approximately 2 miles from the hospital. Both paramedics are unconscious but alive. Officer Hayes is missing." "Missing?" Martinez keyed her radio. How is he missing? Unknown at this time. Looks like the ambulance was forced off the road. No sign of Officer Hayes anywhere. The twins exchanged terrified glances. The bad men had taken Officer Hayes, and he was probably dying. We have to help him. Emily said, her voice small but determined. Girls, the best thing you can do is stay safe and let us handle this. Sergeant Martinez replied, but even as she said it, she knew the situation was more complicated than that. If the corruption went as deep as the children suggested, she couldn't trust her own department. That's when Max began to bark. The German shepherd was staring at the tree line, his bark sharp and insistent. But this wasn't the warning bark from earlier. This was different. This was the bark he used when he found something important during their camping games of hide and seek. "What is it, Max?" Sophie asked. The dog bounded toward the forest, then stopped and looked back at them, barking again. "He wants us to follow him," Emily said. Sergeant Martinez hesitated. Standard protocol said to keep the children safe and wait for backup, but standard protocol assumed you could trust your backup. "Stay close to me," she said. Drawing her service weapon, Max led them about 50 yards into the forest before stopping at the base of a large pine tree. He sat and looked up, whining softly. Sergeant Martinez shined her flashlight up into the branches and gasped. Officer Daniel Hayes was there, unconscious and secured to the trunk. With rope about 10 feet off the ground, blood seeped through his shirt, and his breathing was labored, but he was alive. "How did they get him up there?" Emily whispered. "Probably used the truck and a pulley system," Martinez replied, already calling for emergency assistance, but only from units she knew she could trust. They wanted him to die slowly, where no one would think to look. "How did Max know he was there?" Sophie asked. "Dogs can smell blood from incredible distances," Martinez explained as she began planning a rescue. Max tracked Officer Hayes' scent, but as they worked to figure out how to get Daniel down safely, headlights cut through the forest behind them. "More police?" Emily asked. "Hopefully." Max's growl suggested otherwise. "Girls, get behind the tree." Now Sergeant Martinez's training kicked in as she positioned herself between the children and the approaching vehicle. The pickup truck that had left earlier was back, and this time Tony and Russ weren't alone. 2 more men climbed out, and one of them was wearing a police uniform. "Officer Johnson, evening, Martinez." Johnson called out casually, as if this were a routine traffic stop. "Heard you might need some backup. Everything's under control here." Johnson, Martinez replied, her weapon still drawn. "Is it?" Tony stepped into view, the pipe wrench still in his hand. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you've got some witnesses that need to be managed, and a loose end hanging from a tree," Russ added with a cruel laugh. Sophie pressed herself against the pine tree, looking up at Officer Hayes' unconscious form. He was so still, so pale. Was he even breathing? Martinez Johnson said, his voice taking on a commanding tone. "You're interfering with official police business. Stand down, official." Police business? Martinez didn't lower her weapon. Since when is kidnapping and attempted murder official business? Since it became worth $10 million a year, the fourth man said, stepping into the light. He was older than the others, with graying hair and an expensive suit that looked out of place in the forest. "Sergeant Martinez, I'm District Attorney Thomas Caldwell. I think we can work something out." Emily's heart sank. The corruption went even higher than they'd thought. "You see," Caldwell continued, "this whole unfortunate situation could be resolved very simply. Officer Hayes was killed in the line of duty during a drug bust. Tragic, but these things happen. And the 2 young witnesses, well, they got scared and ran into the woods. Sadly, they got lost and couldn't find their way back. You're talking about murdering children," Martinez said, her voice shaking with rage. "I'm talking about protecting a very lucrative business arrangement," Caldwell replied coldly. "One that's kept this county profitable." For 2 decades, that's when Max made his decision. The German shepherd had been quietly circling the group, using his training and instincts to position himself strategically. Now he saw his opportunity, with a snarl that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself. Max launched himself at Russ, the largest and most dangerous of the men. 80 pounds of muscle, teeth and fury collided with the startled criminal, sending him crashing to the ground. Max. Emily screamed. The attack created chaos. Johnson spun toward the dog, his weapon drawn, but Sergeant Martinez was faster. Her shot took Johnson in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying into the darkness. Tony swung the pipe wrench at Max, but the dog was too quick. He dodged and immediately went after Tony's weapon hand, his powerful jaws clamping down on the man's wrist. Tony screamed and dropped the wrench. "Run!" Martinez shouted to the twins, "Get to the road and flag down help," but Emily and Sophie weren't running. They were looking up at Officer Hayes, who had somehow regained consciousness and was working at the ropes binding him to the tree officer. "Hayes!" Sophie called out. Daniel had heard everything. The corruption, the threats, the plan to murder 2 innocent children and their brave dog. Adrenaline and fury gave him strength he didn't know he possessed. "Girls," he called down weakly, "there's a knife in my boot. Can you reach it?" Emily looked around frantically. The tree wasn't that big around. If she climbed up just a few feet, Emily, no. Sergeant Martinez shouted, still trying to maintain control of the chaotic situation. But Emily was already climbing, her small fingers finding purchase on the rough bark. Sophie held the flashlight steady, giving her sister light to climb by. Meanwhile, Max continued his assault on the criminals. He'd released Tony's wrist and moved to Caldwell, who was trying to back toward the truck. The dog didn't attack the district attorney, but he herded him, using his body and his intimidating growl to keep the man from escaping. Russ was trying to get back to his feet, blood streaming from bite wounds on his arms and legs. Johnson was clutching his wounded shoulder, cursing and trying to retrieve his weapon with his good hand. "Hurry, Emily," Sophie urged as her twin sister reached Daniel's boot level. Emily's small fingers found the handle of the tactical knife and pulled it free. "Got it!" She passed it up to Daniel, who immediately began cutting through his bonds, despite the pain from his injuries. That's when they heard the sirens, real sirens this time, from multiple vehicles approaching fast. Sergeant Martinez had managed to get word to the state police before the confrontation began. "It's over, Caldwell," Martinez shouted over the chaos, but the district attorney wasn't finished. He pulled a small pistol from his jacket, a backup weapon that everyone had missed. "Actually, Sergeant, I think it's just beginning." He aimed the gun not at Martinez, but at Sophie, who was still holding the flashlight and looking up at her sister in the tree. "Everyone stops right now, or the little girl dies." Max immediately pivoted, placing himself between Caldwell and Sophie, but the dog was 15 feet away, too far to reach the DA before he could pull the trigger. Time seemed to freeze, Daniel still tied to the tree, but with one hand free, saw what was happening below Emily, clinging to the tree. Trunk beside him saw it too. "No," Emily whispered. That's when Officer Daniel Hayes did something that would be talked about in police academies for years to come. Despite his broken ribs, despite the blood loss, despite being tied to a tree 10 feet off the ground, he swung himself toward the trunk and pushed off with both feet. The rope holding him snapped from the sudden stress, and Daniel Hayes fell from the tree like an avenging angel, landing directly on top of District Attorney Thomas Caldwell. The impact sent both men crashing to the ground, Caldwell's gun flying harmlessly into the forest. Daniel's broken body couldn't take much more punishment, but he'd accomplished what he set out to do. The children were safe. Max immediately pounced on the dazed district attorney, pinning him to the ground with a growl that promised swift justice for anyone who threatened his family. Emily scrambled down from the tree as quickly as she could, rushing to Officer Hayes' side. "Are you okay?" "You okay?" Daniel tried to smile, but his vision was going dark again. "The girls are they. We're fine," Sophie said, kneeling beside him. "We're all fine because of you." The state police arrived in force. 6 vehicles with officers who had no connection to the local corruption. Within minutes, Tony, Russ, Johnson and Caldwell were all in custody as paramedics, real paramedics this time, who arrived with the state police, worked on Daniel's injuries. He managed to grab Sergeant Martinez's hand. "The girls," he whispered, make sure they're protected. If this goes as deep as I think, they'll be safe." Martinez promised. "I'll make sure of it personally." The paramedic working on Daniel looked up at Martinez. "We need to get him to the trauma center. Immediately, he's lost a lot of blood. And that fall from the tree didn't do his injuries any favors," as they loaded Daniel onto the stretcher. For the second time that night, Emily and Sophie stood with Max watching their unlikely hero fight for his life. "Will he be okay?" Emily asked one of the paramedics. "He's tough," the woman replied, "and he's got something to fight for now. That makes all the difference." As the ambulance pulled away, this time with a full state police escort, the twins finally allowed themselves to feel the exhaustion and fear that had been building all night, but Max wasn't done protecting them yet. The German Shepherd positioned himself between the girls and the crime scene activity, making it clear that anyone who wanted to talk to his charges would have to go through him first. "Good boy, Max," Sophie whispered, scratching behind his ears. "You saved everyone tonight." The dog looked up at her with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to understand exactly what had happened, and exactly how close they'd all come to not making it through the night. But they had made it. Officer Hayes was alive. The bad guys were caught, and 2 9-year-old girls had learned that sometimes the most ordinary people, and dogs, are capable of the most extraordinary courage. The fight was over, but the real miracle was yet to come. 3 weeks later, the Patterson family sat in the waiting room of St. Mary's Medical Center, surrounded by flowers, balloons, and get-well cards from people all over the country. The story of 2 brave little girls and their heroic dog had captured the nation's attention, but Emily and Sophie only cared about one thing: seeing Officer Daniel Hayes walk again. The doctor said he's doing much better. Their mother, Carol Patterson, said softly, "The surgery to repair his internal injuries was successful and his leg is healing nicely." "But will he be the same?" Emily asked, clutching Max's leash as the German Shepherd sat patiently beside her. "Chair, physically he'll recover completely," Dr. Sarah Chen said as she approached the family. "Emotionally, well, that's going to take some time. He's been through a terrible ordeal." What Dr. Chen didn't mention was that Daniel Hayes had been awake for most of the past week, but he hadn't spoken a single word. The psychological trauma of nearly being murdered, combined with the revelation that corruption had infected his beloved police department at the highest levels, had left him in a state of deep depression. "Can we see him now?" Sophie asked hopefully. For a few minutes Dr. Chen agreed, "But remember, he's still very weak." The twins followed the doctor down the sterile hospital corridor, Max's nails clicking on the polished floor. The nursing staff had made a special exception to allow the therapy dog to visit, recognizing that Max had played a crucial role in saving Daniel's life. Daniel's room was filled with flowers and cards from fellow police officers, community members, and complete strangers who had heard about his courage, but the man lying in the hospital bed seemed unaware of any of it. He stared at the ceiling with empty eyes, his face gaunt and pale. The machines monitoring his vital signs beeped rhythmically, but otherwise the room was silent. "Officer Hayes," Emily said softly as they entered. Daniel's eyes shifted toward the sound, but didn't focus on anything in particular. "It's us," Sophie added. Emily and Sophie. "We brought Max to see you." At the mention of the dog's name, something flickered in Daniel's expression. Max approached the bed slowly, his tail wagging tentatively. "He's been worried about you," Emily said. "We all have." Daniel's hand moved slightly on top of the blanket. and Max immediately placed his head beneath it, allowing the wounded officer to feel the dog's warm fur. For several minutes, they sat in silence. The twins didn't know what to say to someone who had sacrificed so much to protect them. How do you thank someone for saving your life? Finally, Sophie spoke up. Officer Hayes, we heard on the news that all the bad guys got arrested, Tony and Russ, and Officer Johnson, and that mean district attorney. They're all going to prison for a really, really long time. Daniel's fingers moved slightly through Max's fur, but he still didn't speak. And Sergeant Martinez got promoted. Emily added, she's going to be the new chief of police. She said the first thing she's going to do is make sure all the other bad police officers are caught. Still no response. Dr. Chen gestured toward the door, indicating that the visit should be brief, but Emily wasn't ready to leave yet. Officer Hayes, she said, moving closer to the bed. Do you remember what you told us that night? You said we were the bravest people you'd ever met. Daniel's eyes finally focused on her face. Well, you're wrong, Emily continued. You're the bravest person we've ever met. You fell out of a tree to save my sister. You fell out of a tree even though you were already hurt. Really bad. Sophie stepped up beside her twin, and before that you were trying to catch bad guys, even though you knew it was dangerous. That's what heroes do. For the first time since the incident, Daniel Hayes spoke. His voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from disuse and medication. I'm not a hero. I almost got you. Girls killed. No, you didn't, Emily said firmly. You saved us. You and Max both saved us. The corruption, it went so deep. I should have known. I should have been more careful. Sophie climbed onto the chair beside his bed so she could look him directly in the eyes. Officer Hayes, my dad always says that you can't control what bad people do. You can only control what good people do. And you did good things. You did really, really good things. Daniel closed his eyes, and for a moment the twins thought he might retreat back into silence. But when he opened them again, there were tears. I keep thinking about what would have happened if you girls hadn't found me, he said. If Max hadn't led you to where I was tied up in the tree, those men would have gotten away with everything. But we did find you, Emily pointed out, and Max did lead us to you. And now the bad guys are caught because of you girls, because you were brave when you needed to be brave. Max whined softly and nudged Daniel's hand with his nose, as if reminding everyone that he'd played a role too, and because of Max, Daniel added, managing a weak smile. Can't forget about Max. Over the next hour, the twins told Daniel everything that had happened since that night. They told him about the reporters who wanted to interview them, about the police officers from other cities who had sent thank you cards, about the dog trainer who wanted to give Max a special award for heroism. But most importantly, they told him about their parents' decision to move to Millbrook County permanently. We were just camping here, Sophie explained. But Mom and Dad said, after everything that happened, we feel like this is home now, and we want to stay close to you and Sergeant Martinez. Chief Martinez. You're staying? Daniel asked, and for the first time since they'd known him, he sounded genuinely happy. If that's okay with you. Emily said shyly, it's more than okay. Daniel struggled to find the words. It's the best news I've heard in weeks. Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway. I'm sorry, but Officer Hayes needs his rest now. You can come back tomorrow if you'd like, as the twins prepared to leave. Daniel called out softly, Emily, Sophie. They turned back toward him. Thank you, he said simply, for everything, for finding me, for staying with me, for not giving up on me. Thank you for being a real police officer, Emily replied, for being one of the good guys. 2 months later, Officer Daniel Hayes stood at the podium in the Millbrook County Courthouse, his left leg still supported by a walking cast, but his voice strong and clear. Your Honor, the corruption that infected our police department ran deeper than anyone imagined, but it was exposed not by an experienced detective or an internal affairs investigation. It was exposed by two 9-year-old girls and their dog, who refused to abandon a wounded police officer on a dark road. He turned to look at Emily and Sophie, who sat in the front row with their parents, and Max, Emily and Sophie Patterson showed me what real courage looks like. It's not the absence of fear. They were terrified that night. Real courage is doing the right thing, even when you're afraid, even when it's dangerous, even when it would be easier to just walk away. The courtroom was packed with reporters, police officers, and community members who had come to witness the conclusion of what the media had dubbed the miracle on Miller Road. Because of their bravery, Daniel continued, 17 corrupt officials have been arrested and charged. A human trafficking ring that had operated for 20 years has been dismantled, and most importantly, dozens of victims, people who had been bought and sold like property, have been rescued and are receiving the help they need. As Daniel spoke, Max lay quietly at Sophie's feet, wearing a special collar that designated him as an official therapy dog for the police department. Chief Martinez had insisted that the German Shepherd be given a permanent role helping other officers deal with trauma and stress. The night this all began, Daniel said, his voice growing emotional, I was prepared to die on that road. I thought my story was over, but Emily and Sophie taught me something important. Sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. He looked directly at the twins again. You saved more than my life that night. You saved my faith in what it means to serve and protect. You reminded me that there are still people worth fighting for, worth taking risks, but worth getting back up for. After the ceremony, the Patterson family gathered with Daniel in the courthouse cafeteria. Max had been given special permission to join them, and he was currently enjoying the attention of several off-duty police officers who wanted to meet the famous hero dog. So what happens now? Carol Patterson asked Daniel. Now I go back to work, he replied with a smile. Chief Martinez has asked me to head up a new anti-trafficking task force. We're going to make sure something like this never happens in our county again. And we're going to help, Emily declared. Help how? Daniel asked. Amused, Max is really good at finding things, Sophie explained seriously. Maybe he could help you find more bad guys. Daniel laughed, the first genuine laugh anyone had heard from him since the attack. I think Max has done enough law enforcement for one lifetime. How about we let him be a regular dog for a while? But even as he said it, Daniel knew that Max would never be a regular dog. None of them would ever be regular again. They had faced evil together and emerged victorious, bound by an experience that had tested their courage and revealed their character. 6 months later, the Millbrook County Police Department held its annual award ceremony. Officer Daniel Hayes received the Medal of Valor for his investigation that had exposed the corruption and trafficking ring. Emily and Sophie Patterson received the department's first ever Civilian Heroism Award, recognizing their courage in saving an officer's life and helping to bring criminals to justice. And Max received something that had never been given to a dog before, an honorary badge designating him as an official member of the Millbrook County Police Department. As Chief Martinez pinned the badge to Max's collar, she said, "This department has learned that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes they wear uniforms, sometimes they wear pigtails, and sometimes they have 4 legs and a tail." The crowd applauded, but Daniel wasn't listening to the ceremony anymore. He was watching Emily and Sophie, now 10 years old, as they beamed with pride at their beloved dog. These 2 little girls had taught him that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid. They had shown him that sometimes the smallest people can make the biggest difference, and they had proved that on a dark road, when everything seems hopeless, miracles can still happen. All it takes is 2 brave girls, a loyal dog, and the unshakable belief that good will always triumph over evil, no matter how impossible the odds might seem. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Daniel knelt down to Max's level and scratched behind the dog's ears. "Thank you, boy," he whispered. "Thank you for leading them to me. Thank you for protecting them. Thank you for teaching me what it really means to never give up. Give up." Max looked up at him with intelligent brown eyes and wagged his tail once as if to say, "That's what partners do." And in that moment, Daniel Hayes knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged, protecting a community that had given him two extraordinary little girls and their miraculous dog. The road that had nearly been his ending had instead become his new beginning, and that more than anything else was the real miracle on Miller Road.